Julian Knox hits the transfer portal, and it shows that you can't take many developmental projects anymore. I'll talk about it next year on Locked On Horned Frogs.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On Horned Frogs your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Steven Simcox. I've covered TCU athletics in some form or fashion for the last 12 years. We're going to talk about Arizona State later in the show and the performance they put out against Texas. Yes, they lose, but hopefully they got the Big 12 a little bit of respect along the way by taking the Longhorns into double overtime. TCU Women's Hoops, they got a victory. We'll have some more thoughts about Mike Buddy, new athletic director coming over from Army. But we start today with the transfer portal, and we're in a season right now. The coaching staff, for the most part, is taking some time off, well-deserved. Season's over, getting a little bit of a break before going into the offseason program and more recruiting. So you're not going to see offers right now. What you're seeing at the moment is TCU has a 5-day window after the bowl game for players to get their paperwork in order and enter the transfer portal, or at least do the work of saying, hey, I would like to declare, getting it in with the compliance office and seeing what happens. So there have been some names trickling out over the last few days. Kavian Huddleston, young defensive lineman yesterday. That news came down. 2 players today. Kylan Salter, linebacker, brother of Caden Salter, who is just transferred to Colorado. Caden's a quarterback. Kylan is a linebacker, though. Kylan had 2 tackles in his career at TCU. He was a 2023 recruit, 3-star player. Colorado seems like the place where he would end up. So I guess on that level, it makes sense. He gets to go play with his brother. Colorado recruited him out of high school. It does surprise me a little bit because I think there's an opportunity at linebacker. Now, what we're seeing right now is a combination of guys that are making a move because whatever reason, not a great fit, don't see themselves cracking the 2 deep on the depth chart, or we're also seeing exit interviews, the aftermath of that, where the coaching staff in this new era of the portal and essentially free agency each and every year, they communicate to some players, hey, I feel like it's a good time for you to move on. There might not be a spot here for you. I don't think that's the case here, though, with Kylan Salter. I look at the depth chart at linebacker. Sure, Nnamdi Obaizor is coming back. Caleb Alarm-Zor coming back. Those 2 guys seem like surefire starters. But beyond that, I mean, Max Carroll's done some good things, especially on special teams. He's still a young player, though, and I feel like there's at least an opportunity for Kylan to crack the 2 deep. The 2025 class, Dylan Arkansas from Denton Ryan, and then Sam Haley from Nashville, Tennessee. Those guys are inside linebackers. I feel like it would be a big uphill battle for them to get where they need to be into that chart to dethrone him. So sort of a head scratcher there, but not a player who's put up a lot of numbers to this point, someone who you're kind of counting on for the future. Another name that hit the portal is at corner, and that's Julian Knox. And I totally understand where Julian's coming from. TCU added a corner in the portal and Elijah Jackson. They've got 2 guys coming back from injury, and Avery Hellman, Vernon Glover. That would seem to make sense as dudes who are going to be either starters or rotational pieces. Channing Canada is a veteran that will get a lot of reps. Javon McIver is going to get plenty of chances. He came on at the end of the year and made some plays. And Julian Knox was a fascinating take by the staff at the time because his career up to that point at North Crowley, which North Crowley just won a 6A state title. They'd have thrown Duncanville this year. They've become sort of the premier program, at least in the right now, in Texas high school football. They've got a lot of talent. But Julian Knox was a backup quarterback when he came to a TCU camp. And Sonny Dykes has done this for several years now. He started at SMU. He's brought it over to TCU. They host these camps a couple times a year in the summer, and they get to look at these guys up close. And it seems like the way they've used it, along with trying to advance and leverage relationships they have with big-time prospects, is also taking some guys who are under the radar, getting some real-deal testing numbers on those players, getting to talk with them one-on-one. They're sharing that time with schools, but they have the advantage of being on their home turf, getting to dictate what the process is and how it works, all those things. Well, Julian Knox is a fantastic athlete. He tested off the charts at this camp. TCU offered him. It was the biggest offer that he had at the time. He ends up committing. He moves over to the secondary in his final year at North Crowley. But when he was offered by TCU, he was just a guy that was behind Chris Jimerson, who had a great high school career. And it was definitely a, hey, we think this guy has the physical makeup and the athletic ability to be a player. We're sort of taking him as an athlete. We're going to take a flyer on him as a corner. We're going to give him a direction where he can go back to that high school coaching staff and say, hey, TCU wants me to play in the secondary. Let's get me locked in there. I don't know how much you can do that now in the portal era. And what I mean by that is there was a time where that was a really popular thing to do. You take a guy based on some physical attributes, or you just scout somebody that you like. You watch him on film and you say, you know what? Maybe this dude is not the most heavily recruited player in the country. He's not getting offer after offer, but I like what I see here. I'm going to take him. We're going to get him in the weight room, get him in the conditioning program. And we sort of all know the expectation here that this is a multi-year process. And you might not see the field until you're a junior. But we're going to work on molding you into the player that we want you to be, making sure you fit into our system. And then when it's your time to play as an upperclassman, you'll thrive. That's what Gary Patterson did at a very high level for a long time. And he also was good at sprinkling in. He would win some recruiting battles here and there with some higher-rated guys. But especially on defense, he made a living by finding athletes at small schools and turning them into sideline-to-sideline physical defensive players that were great at what they did and that fit his hybrid scheme really well. And that was sort of the idea with Julian Knox. And I'm sure it hurt that the guy that signed him, Joe Gillespie, moves on. Suddenly there's a new player, there's a new boss in charge who, along with the rest of the country, is searching for corners that are big, that are physical, that are rangy, that can cover a lot of ground. I talked with Brian, our Locked On recruiting expert, about this a couple years ago. Corner's a position where you're looking for dudes who are big, physical, and if they get beat, they can use that stride and that size to make up that ground. So even if they're beat by a step or two, they can find a way to break up the pass, close in on it, make things happen. So that's what they hope Julian Knox could be. But the thought process was it's going to take some time, right? This is a project. I don't think you can take projects like that in the portal era. And the reason I say that, there's no disrespect to Julian Knox, but it's just that if there was a candidate for somebody who you were in your mind, you're like, okay, this is a dude who's going to stick around because he knows what the expectation is up front. He understands that he's not going to play right away, that TCU is going to get him sort of molded physically into what they want him to be. They're going to work on his technique, teach him a position that he's not super familiar with yet. And when he's a junior and a senior, he'll be a contributor. But he bolts after one season. And it's like, well, what's the plan here? And I understand he looks at the situation and says, well, they just went and got a fifth-year senior at corner who can play right away. There's other guys in front of me that are older. There's some young guys in front of me that the coaching staff seems to have their eye on. So there's no path for me to crack the two deep. And if I wait another year and I continue to develop, that's all well and good. But who's to say that they don't go and get another super senior or redshirt junior in the portal next offseason, and suddenly I'm kind of back in the same situation that I was in. And that's got to be frustrating for these players. They all want to play. That's the bottom line. People talk about the portal, and they talk about like entitlement and bad attitudes and kids being spoiled. I mean, I think a lot of it just boils down to these guys want to play right away. But in my mind, I'm like, if there was a person that would sort of understand what the coaching staff, the vision that they have for his future, and what that would entail, and that it would take some patience and it was going to take some time. It'll be Julian, but he's going to move on elsewhere. And I don't know how much longer you can continue to have this idea of, hey, we're going to take 2, 3, 4 guys that maybe don't make sense right now on paper, but down the line they will. Especially at these skill positions like corner and wide receiver. I would still say offense and defensive line, you have that luxury where it's sort of implied around the country. You have your rare cases where, okay, true freshman offensive lineman's like a 5-star talent, huge, already at basically their peak physically, and they're just going to come in and be a stonewall force right away. But that's super rare. The majority of these guys, they're going to have to put on weight in the weight room, learn better techniques, get up to speed on scheme, and they know the drill. They know, all right, hopefully when I'm a sophomore, junior, I can start to see what my path looks like to get on the field. But at wide receiver and corner, there's just always going to be a revolving door in the portal of players with experience that can play right away, that can do something for you right now. I'm not blaming TCU for taking those guys and saying, hey, we need a starter, or we at least need somebody that can compete for a starting job. If we're in a rough situation, they can step in and they're not going to skip a beat. And it's that push and pull that I've talked about before of how do you balance? I'm going to trust our young guys. I'm going to trust our development cycle, but I also need somebody who can play right away. And in this case, it looks like somebody who can play right away is the way they're going to move. And the consequence of that is you lose a very intriguing athlete who was somebody you kind of tabbed as, hey, this is a guy that we feel like might not be getting all the attention that he deserves, but he's got the traits and the attributes to be a great player. Somebody that listens to the show, they worked with Julian's mom, I believe. And I wish him the best. I don't mean this in any disrespect to him. It's just an observation of the way the sport's going. At the time, I was super excited about it. I think he could end up being a great player at the college level. It's just unfortunate that it's ending this way when it felt like the point of that evaluation was, hey, let's get somebody on campus in our program who can sort of take some time to get where they need to be. But he's hitting the portal along with Kylan Salter at linebacker. A couple moves on the defensive side of the ball. When we come back, Arizona State showed what the Big 12 could do on New Year's Day. We'll talk about it next year on Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. FanDuel is where the game starts. They've been a great sponsor for so long. They're super loyal to us, and we love them for that. If you've ever been curious about the sports wagering world, it's the perfect time to get on board. Right now, customers can finish the NFL regular season strong with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. And that's on America's #1 sportsbook, FanDuel.com, or on the FanDuel app. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a dub. You can bet on which players will score a touchdown, how many points each team will score. It's thrilling. It's not as simple as just, hey, which team's going to cover the spread. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL and a proud sponsor of the Locked On Network. Well, we finally got a super competitive and awesome game in the new 12-team college football playoff. Unfortunately, the Texas Longhorns prevailed, and they carried the SEC banner with a victory over our Big 12 counterpart, Arizona State, 39-31. The win was in double overtime. Arizona State was down 24-8, and they just could not find a way to score through really the first 3 quarters of this ball game. I mean, they were consistently in plus territory in the red zone a few times. Cam Scatterbo had an outstanding ball game. Ended up being named the offensive MVP despite the loss, which I understand it. I don't love it. My sports history people, was it Chuck Howley for the Cowboys that won an MVP, a Super Bowl MVP in a losing effort? They lost that game to the Baltimore Colts in an ugly ball game. But he was the MVP because I believe he had a couple forced turnovers in that game, and it was a defensive struggle. Cam named the MVP of this ball game, though, because he had 30 carries for 143 yards, 8 catches for 99 yards. Oh, and also he threw a touchdown pass on a halfback pass on 4th and 2 from the 42-yard line. That basically changed the game. It was 24-8 at that point. He throws that touchdown pass. Arizona State cuts it 24-16. They get an interception. They go down and score again. Tie it up at 24. And they had Texas up against it. I mean, it was 4th and 13 in overtime. They scored on their first offensive possession. All they got to do is get off the field and they win the game. But Quinn Ewers finds Matthew Golden on a touchdown pass, and they tie it up. Texas scores a touchdown, and they force a turnover on the next Arizona State offensive play to win the ball game. But my main takeaway from this, I was pleasantly surprised at how well Arizona State stood up physically to this Texas team. Steve Sarkisian has done a great job. Texas for years, they had all these resources. They had all the advantages in the world. And I just always felt like they weren't building their team the right way. They always had a revolving door of skilled players who could make things happen. Quarterback was kind of hit or miss, but they had some good ones. And up front, they never had a big advantage. But the way they've used their NIL to secure offensive and defensive linemen has been amazing. That defensive line and linebacker core is phenomenal. But Arizona State, late in that ball game, they were putting together scoring drives. Cam Scatterbo was fantastic. Sam Levitt, not like the most impressive line, but it was one of those things where if you watch the game, you're like, okay, this dude's making plays. He was running for his life basically all day, making things happen off schedule, scrambling, had a huge scramble for a first down on like 3rd and 16 in overtime. Just found a way to get the job done. Kenny Dillingham's a great coach. And I really hope, I haven't seen a lot of reaction other than, the typical stuff you see on social media. Arizona State equipped themselves well today. They arguably should have won. And they didn't. And, that's the bottom line. Like, you can't – coulda, shoulda, woulda. They had their chances. Bert Auburn missed 2 field goals in the last 2 minutes of that game. He missed one that would have given them the lead with like 1:44 left, and then Arizona State had a 3-and-out. He doinked one off the uprights that would have basically won the game as time was running down. So they had their breaks, but they also, Arizona State had a ton of missed opportunities of their own. They left points on the board that cost them that ball game. I felt like for a lot of that game, they were bringing the wood. They were bringing the physicality. They were being the team that was dictating the pace, which is they couldn't convert in the red zone when they needed to. So I hope this gives the Big 12 some more respect. I'm skeptical that it will on the national standpoint because at the end of the day, you got to win the game. And we saw in the case of TCU, even if you win the playoff game, if you don't follow it up with a great performance in the next game, they'll still find a way to dismiss you. The way that 2022 team gets dismissed is just ridiculous. It makes me mad every time I think about it. But those are the breaks when you get beat like that in the national stage in the national championship game. Arizona State held up well, though. And it sort of brings me back to my show on, I guess that was Monday, Tuesday. I'm losing track of days over the holiday break. I need my kids to get back in school. Where BYU had a great season. And yes, the timing of their losses were really unfortunate. And it was bad for the playoff committee and how they viewed them. But, I mean, Arizona State was one of those teams that beat them. Arizona State looked like one of the best teams in the country tonight. So I'm really happy with how they performed, with how they played. And hopefully it opens some eyebrows of, okay, this is not just a mediocre league with a lot of teams, you know, beating each other, and it's always close because, hey, everybody's kind of in the same boat, but nobody's great. Arizona State looked like a truly great team tonight. And I'm happy for Kenny Dillingham and company, but I'm also disappointed for them in the way it ended. When we come back, Jeremy Clark from 247 Sports, he spoke with new TCU athletic director Mike Buddy. I'll share a snippet of that conversation next here on Locked on Horned Frogs, your team every day. Gametime. If you need tickets on the secondary market, download the Gametime app today. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, flash deals. You can get tickets even up to the first quarter of the ball game. There's no hidden fees. It's super easy to navigate and use. They show you a picture of what you're going to see when you sit down, the view from your seat. They tell you exactly what you're going to pay. There's some fees, but they tell you exactly what you're going to pay at Gametime. And we appreciate them. It's never been easier. It goes straight to your phone, the tickets do. So you don't have to wonder, is it in my wallet? Is it in, what's the case? It's there for you. Gametime. It's where you can get tickets on the secondary market. We appreciate them and their sponsorship of the Locked On Network. If you missed the news yesterday, Mike Buddy from Army is taking over for Jeremiah Donati, who left for the same position at South Carolina. And Jeremy Clark from 247 Sports spoke with Mike this afternoon. I'm not going to share the whole conversation out of respect for his work, but a brief snippet of that conversation. I like this answer. What are some of your goals and visions that you have at TCU? My nature is to push beyond boundaries. You mentioned the $170 million. No one has ever raised more than $40 million for a project in Army before. I got there, and frankly, there's just not much there's not that much donor base to succeed in that effort. But I just have a history of developing relationships and getting people to elevate their expectations. My goal at TCU is to win national championships and more urgently, make sure we're prepared at the highest level that we can be for the new revenue sharing model, continue to evolve in the transfer portal, and make sure TCU is best positioned to have a seat at the table that puts them in the best position for student athletes to succeed. So the context of that, he was talking about this very ambitious project that he pulled off at Army to bring a modern innovation to Michie Stadium, which has been the historic venue that they played at in West Point for a long time. He raised $170 million to do that. Apparently, nobody at that point had raised more than $40 million at Army. And he mentioned that he talked with Army donors about his vision for Army when he got there and how he wanted them to be a player on the national scale and a player in conference realignment and win national titles. And that most of the people that he was talking to, he said he could feel like they were sort of looking at him like that's not possible here. But he has a history of getting people to rally behind him and elevating their expectations. So he wants to win national titles here. And his first job is going to be aligning this donor base and saying, hey, we can get there. We can do this. Here's the blueprint to make it happen. So that was a positive to me. I mean, it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to do it, but I thought it was cool that he mentioned it and that's, a clear vision that he has. TCU women's basketball, they take down Colorado tonight. Kind of an ugly game for a lot of it, but they end up pulling away and winning that ball game 63-30. Sedona Prince had 14 points. Haley Van Lith ended up with 14 as well. They were your leading scorers. Taylor Bigby had some big shots. She only ended up with 7 points, but she had a big three that extended the lead to 8 late in that ball game. Colorado was coming off an upset at number 14 West Virginia in their first Big 12 contest. So the women continued to roll along. I thought they didn't play their best night offensively, but they hung in there and found a way to get it done. So I was encouraged by that. They'll play Cincinnati on Saturday night. The men play Kansas State, doubleheader at Shalimar Arena. Hopefully both teams can, I guess in the women's case, keep it going. In the men's case, bounce back from that opening conference loss to Arizona on the road. There's no easy way to transition to this last thing I want to talk about, but I did want to put this news out there. Many of you, I'm sure, are aware of the terrorist attack that happened in New Orleans on New Year's Eve, or I guess early morning on New Year's Day. One of the victims in that attack was the brother of TCU wide receiver Jack Besh. His name is Tiger Besh. He's 28 years old. He played football at Princeton. He was an all-Ivy League kick returner, and he was out celebrating the new year in New Orleans like a lot of people were, and this tragic thing happened to him. Jack Besh put out a tweet earlier today. Says, "Love you always, brother. You inspired me every day. Now you get to be with me in every moment. I got this family tea. Don't worry. This is for us." So I just wanted to pass along my condolences and encourage everybody to pray for the Besh family in a very tragic time. Jack Besh obviously did amazing things for TCU football program on and off the field over the past few years, but he's more than a football player. He's a person, and he loved his brother, and I just can't imagine the pain that him and his family are going through right now. So I wanted to just take a brief moment to give my condolences to them and let them know that we're thinking of them, and I hope the TCU community can rally around them in a big way in the coming weeks and months. We'll be back tomorrow. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast.